So I will be talking about Nauruan causative morphology in the context of Micronesian. So first, some background on Nauruan before we get into that. So Nauru is a raised coral atoll in the Central Pacific, 21 square kilometers, of which most are uninhabitable due to phosphate mining, and the rest are threatened by rising sea. It's isolated, so the closest land is Ocean Island, 300 kilometers away, and a few other Micronesian islands a bit further in Kiribati and Micronesia and Marshall Islands. There's a population of about 10, 11,000, of which 6,000 or so are speakers, and a few more thousand in Australia and New Zealand. The language is vital in the sense that it's spoken by all generations and actively used, including by small children, but it is threatened by contact with English and other languages. It is a Micronesian language, probably the first branching of Micronesian, but highly divergent, and its exact position is uncertain due to nearly total lack of cognates and obvious sound correspondences. It is, like I said, undergoing disruption, rapid change due to various social changes that have happened due to mining and extensive contact with other languages, so Gilbertese, German, English, Chinese should be on this list, and more recently an unusual situation for oceanic contact with Persian and Arabic due to the settlement of large number of refugees who are now in the community and intermarrying and so forth with the locals. So this is the only picture I have to situate in the Pacific, so here's the network map of the Nauru Airlines. There are very few sources on the language. There's a missionary grammar from a while ago of varying quality. There is some work from the 70s that was coming out of Hawaii, and some more recent work. So in particular, I've done field work on location for a while now, though I haven't been there for a couple of years. I've been working with the community on the dictionary of Nauruan, so that can't be shared yet and won't be shared for a while, but if you are eager to get your hands on some Nauruan data, I've circulated a Nauruan roots list, so if you're a historical linguist and want to look for things, ask me afterwards. I'll present Nauruan data today in orthography, not in phonemic transcription, following the tradition of the dictionary. So I'm going to talk about causatives in Nauruan, but in the context of Micronesian. So in Micronesian, the causative prefix is ka, has a variety of functions, not just causatives, but beyond causatives, it derives adjectives and nouns and derives active intransitives. The cognate morphemes in Nauruan also do these things, but as I'll try to suggest, the details of the Nauruan facts point to a diachronic pathway that leads from causative to the other uses and to the observed distribution. So I will suggest cautiously the following pathways. By the way, I'm a phonologist normally, and so I think this is the first talk I've given. It's not phonology, so I'm going to rely on some phonological terms. I will suggest that the picture that we see in Micronesian and Nauruan results from a two-step derivation from conversion from verb to noun and back to verb, so we call that Duke of York, so there and back again, followed by rule telescoping, so that means the disappearance of the middle step of the two-step process. So first, before we get to Nauruan, I'll go through some Micronesian facts. For background, so the Micronesian prefix causative is ka, which is unusual for oceanic. So just to give a quote here from Evans, so Micronesian languages, reflexes of ka function as productive causative prefixes, function which in other languages associated with pa or paka. Pre-Micronesian would have retained Proto-Oceanic Baka as a causative prefix. At a later stage, an idiosyncratic innovation occurred, and the initial syllable was lost from this form, leaving ka as the causative prefix. It is most economical to posit this period of loss as pre-Micronesian, because as far as I know, Micronesian languages uniformly reflect ka and not baka. So we'll see that this last point will need to be probably revised. So as far as what ka does in Micronesian, so it does two groups of things. So one is it acts as a valence increasing morpheme that adds a causative argument. So in two sort of groups of situations, so two states or adjectives, it turns them into causative change of state verbs. And for active intransitives, it creates causative transitive verbs. It also derives intransitives with no valence increase. And I've grouped these uses into three categories. So for first, it can derive from states or adjectives. It can derive what might be described as causative qualities. So these are adjectives or nouns. From states, it can derive active intransitives that have the meaning of some kind of activity associated with the state. And finally, it can derive one active intransitive from another. Generally, so based on my reading of the published sources of the Micronesian Facts, the languages fall into two groups. So there's a Gilbertese type language, which includes only uses 1a, and a Marshalese type language, which includes both of these uses. So this is sort of same information in the form of a table. So here is the Gilbertese type languages, which are Gilbertese, Kashayan, Pompeian, Boolean, and the Marshalese type, which are Marshalese and Mokilese. So these are the sources that are available to me. And these are the two types of uses. So I will just gallop through the Micronesian data that supports these claims, so don't be alarmed by 48 slides in the corner there, so I'll go through this quickly. So Gilbertese, for example, is an example of the first type of language where the morpheme ka is productive and can be used to transitivize almost any intransitive verb to make a causative. So here is the causative change of state with adjectives, and here's the transitive causatives with verbs like go and so forth. Kashayan, so it has the causative prefix, whose origin is disputed by various different sources. Also, clearly with these two functions. So from adjectives, it derives causative change of state verbs and derives various intransitive, from intransitives derives causative transitive verbs. Pompeian has the same two sets of uses, so not all of these were glossed in the grammar by Reg, but they seem to be falling into the two same categories. And finally, in this type of language, Boolean, again, causative change of state verbs with states and transitive causatives with active verbs. So these are the four languages that fall into the first group with just the two uses of the prefix ka, or whatever its reflex. Now the other type of Micronesian language, so Marshalese, has again the same kinds of uses with the prefix ka or some allomorph. So state to causative change of state, and transitive causative from an intransitive verb. At the same time, Bender lists other situations where he says derivations in which there are no syntactic consequences, that I think means no valence consequences, no valence increase, only semantic features of the source verb are changed in verbs derived by this prefix. And so I regrouped his data a bit, but I think they also fall into the three categories that I've suggested. So from stative states, like be angry or be afraid, be surprised, it derives verbs that are also intransitive and that describe the quality of the causator. There's a group, another group of derivations from states that results in an active intransitive verb that describes some activity associated with the state. And finally, a group where one intransitive becomes another intransitive with no apparent regularity to the semantics. And Marshalese has, I'll just go through this more quickly, so has the same 5 groups of uses. So the 2 that correspond to the Gilbertese type of language, causative change of state and transitive causatives, and the other 3, although one of them isn't very well populated, so I couldn't find more than one example. And here are the causator quality, which are very frequent, according to Harrison. So here's the table again. So there's 2 groups of languages, and I'll just set aside the point that I think it's interesting that Marshalese and Marshalese fall into a category. So there's some other evidence that suggests influence from Marshalese to Marshalese, but whether these are independent or not, we can just set aside. Now, finally, getting to Nauruan. So Nauruan, in a sense, is both a Gilbertese type language and a Marshalese type language because it has not 1 but 2 causative prefixes. So one of them is spelled with O with a tilde, which is pronounced a, and the other is ka. The first prefix, a, occasionally ka as well, increases valence. So it acts as a Gilbertese type causative prefix. So it adds causors and creates causative change of state verbs. Ka, however, doesn't do that. It fulfills, or sometimes does that, but it also fulfills the other roles, so the non-valence increasing roles of the causative that you see in Marshalese and Marshalese. So Nauruan has separate morphemes for the 2 sets of functions. So here are some data. So first with the prefix a. So here are various examples of causative change of state verbs from derived from adjectives. And here are transitive causatives from intransitives. So fight, cause to fight, fail, defeat, and so forth. Sometimes ka does the same. So there's a few examples where you see these words with ka that also look like causatives of the same type. But most of the words that have this prefix, it functions in the way that ka functions in Marshalese type languages. So here are the causator quality, which is a very productive pattern, especially with psych verbs. From happy, you get the cause of happiness, the cause of jealousy, the cause of surprise, and so forth. From statives, you can get active intransitives, and from various active intransitives, you also get other active intransitives. I'll talk a bit more about how these work and what the contribution of ka is a bit later. So first, I'm going to comment a little bit on the history. So the probable sources of these 2 morphemes are the ka and baka, or possibly pa and baka of Proto-Micronesian and Proto-Oceanic. So one of the few regular correspondences that can be suggested for Nauruan is that initial consonants were lost. That is makes it likely that these are the sources. So Nauruan is the one Micronesian language that shows both reflexes as opposed to just ka. So the questions that I want to think about are, so what is the connection between causative and the other uses of ka? And as a kind of sub-question, so whether those other uses are an innovation or a retention. So I would like to cautiously suggest for the second question that these are innovations. So if they had been retentions, Gilbertese and Pohnpei and so forth would have expected to show fossilized forms with ka in the other uses. But as far as I can tell, that's not the case, although, of course, I say this cautiously because that's negative evidence. And it would be kind of puzzling why languages tend to lose only the ka meanings, but not the other meanings of these morphemes. But to think about the question number one, so what is the connection between causative? So let's look at some syntactic differences between these two morphemes in Nauruan. So there are two of them. So one of them has to do with transitivity, and the other has to do with the category of the derived word. So occasionally there are words that can take both of these causative prefixes, but like I said, they're not the same words, and so they are the words that take a are transitive, the words that take ka are not, and words that take a are verbs, while ka words at least can be nominal. So the words derived by the a causative prefix are inherently transitive, so they can't be transitivized with the transitive suffix, and they can take pronominal object affixes, which transitive verbs do. Ka words are not like that, so they can be verbs, so they can take tense aspect modifiers, and it's compatible with various auxiliaries for tense aspect, but they cannot take pronominal objects. They can take complements, but complements must be non-specific. These complements may not be focused or extracted, and these ka words can take the transitive affix and be transitivized. So ka words are semi-transitive, so with I think we've just heard about that in the previous talk, with objects incorporated into the verbal complex. So here's some evidence for the facts that I've just told you. So these are unacceptable forms with object suffixes. This is a verbal use of a ka word. This is an example that shows that the object cannot be definite. Can't take a definite determiner or possessive. And cannot be extracted, so you can't ask a question of a object of a ka word. So what are you building? What is it that you teach? The only way to ask a question is to leave the object in situ as a kind of echo question. And so here's an extraction example. So the house you're building is tall is impossible with k words. And these words, of course, can be transitivized, and then the object restriction is lifted, and they just behave like regular transitives. So I'll just show the data for a few seconds and go on. So the second difference between ka and a words is that ka can be nominals. There is a large number of such examples. So here are some of them. How do we know they're nominal? So there's morphology, so they can take the nominal prefix e, which is sort of optional, but it's available to nouns. They cannot be take the perfective n, which is goes on verbs and adjectives, and they're distributed as nominals with possessives and determiners. So again, in the interest of time, I'll show some data. So these are two examples from some stories from the 30s where that show this sort of distribution. So the way I would like to suggest to think about these facts is in the following scenario, so the following pathway. So the starting point is a Gilbertese type causative morpheme in a language with productive verb to noun derivation conversion, which Nauruan is. So the Duke of York story goes like this. So causatives undergo verb-to-noun derivation. So the verb meaning cause sadness becomes a nominal meaning causer of sadness. So the result of this is the first type of the ka uses, which I've called causer quality. The resulting nominal then in the Duke of York fashion goes back and undergoes noun to verb derivation. So causer of sadness becomes act like a causer of sadness, so it becomes an active verb. The result of this is the second type of ka uses that I've described, so reducing active intransitives from states. And finally, if the sequence, the Duke of York sequence is telescoped, so instead of verb to noun to verb, you have verb to verb, the result is a verb that derives active intransitives from other verbs. And the language thus gains a general affix for producing active intransitives in this way. So this sort of pathway has parallels, near parallels, in at least 3 places that I could locate. So in West Greenlandic, in Mande, where according to Kreisels, there are causative and antipassive affixes that are cognates that developed according to a similar scenario, and in Tibetan, in a Tibetan language, in work by Guillaume. So I'll quote from his paper on this 2-stage process of the origins of causatives and detransitivizer. So the details are a bit different in those languages, but the idea, I think, is the same. So first, the base verb is nominalized to a bare infinitive. This nominalization neutralizes the transitivity of the verb. Then a denominal verb is created from the bare infinitive with a transitivity value different from the base verb. So in our case, the transitivity value is intransitive, resulting from this this pathway. So 2 properties of these words follow, I think, from the story. So one, as it's already discussed, they're used to derive causer qualities, and the other is their half transitivity. So this is the result of losing their transitivity in the verb to noun step of the derivation, and as a result, they come out as verb level intransitives, but semantic transitives. Again, we've just heard about this in the previous talk. So this predicts that if languages differ in the extent of their non-causative uses of morpheme like ka, then there's a kind of hierarchy that goes in order. So you should have state to active only if you have causative quality and so forth. And this is kind of hard to verify for the Micronesian facts that I have at the moment, but this is something to look much more carefully at. So the other expectation is that ka should act as a nominalizer elsewhere, and elsewhere in other Micronesian languages, and ka words should be semi-transitive in languages other than Nauruan. And there's some kind of suggestive facts that I was able to extract from the published grammars. So for example, there's 2 data points in the Willian grammar, so the author suggests that there's a nominalizing prefix which has the same shape as the causative prefix and may be related to it historically. And finally, there is some data in Marshalese that shows that these ga words with no transitive affix are also semi-transitive. And thank you to my Nauruan friends and consultants, and thank you.
Thank you, Lev. There is any question?
Yeah.
This is kind of not really specifically about your data, but it's about the larger implications of it. One of the things that struck me listening to this talk, and then also to Sabrina's, and so actually maybe the question goes to both of you, is the cases where you've got transitive verbs that don't seem to have the transitive suffix, right? And I was wondering whether, and what that reminded me of was the distinction that Tanya Reinhardt and Eric Royland made years and years ago between reflexively marked and reflexive verbs. where you turned out to be helpful in differentiating the different kinds of reflexive patterns there are cross-linguistically. And I just wondered if you have any thoughts about whether, in combination with the kind of data that we were looking at in the last talk as well, that maybe there's a case in the oceanic languages for suggesting that you've got transitive verbs and you've got transitively marked verbs. And we need to make actually a more careful distinction between that.
Possibly. I don't have anything smart to say about that, but yes, thank you. I'll think about it. Yeah.
Yes, I've been thinking too that I would like some additional label for certain types of verbs. Yes, especially the ones that take the suffix "e" in mono. I mean, with intransitive ones or with any kind of use of applicatives, that's a different matter. But the transitive suffix, yes, I would like something there. I would like a label there. Yes. Yes, and ideally, I would also like to be able to capture that. They, once either applicativized verbs or transitivized verbs then pattern in the distribution like transitive and ambitransitive verbs, that would be neat too. Yeah.
So I think maybe one way to understand this is to have a better grasp than I do of the syntax of these things. So I've called it incorporation, and it looks like that from the point of view of the kind of stuff that Sugita described. But what it really is, I don't know. Yeah. So, yeah.
Thank you. I think it was a really interesting presentation. I have a comment and a question. The comment is, if you term a derivational process after a nursery rhyme, you should be willing to sing it, especially in a multicultural context. So warning, next time.
Thank you.
I won't make you do it now.
Actually, I don't know the rhyme.
Oh, it's the old grand Duke. Yeah. Okay, so the back and forth thing program. You probably said this and I just missed it, but so you have the two causative morphemes and you gave the likely historical origin for them. Based on your current judgment, is it clear or can you hypothesize whether they both have developed in the language or whether one might have developed and one might have been borrowed sideways from one of the other Micronesian languages?
Well, so yes, I've thought about that, but the source of borrowings in Nauruan from other Micronesian languages is Gilbertese, and there's a huge layer of Gilbertese vocabulary, and Gilbertese is maybe the clearest Gilbertese type language, so it doesn't have these things. It doesn't seem to have these things. But yes, yes, but there's I guess a kind of historical puzzle there is how come there were two to begin with. Right, and so there are other languages where there's two, right? So there's, so if I recall, there's Teop, which has reflexes of paka and pa, which have different functions, but not this sort of different functions. So that has to do with numerals and I think ordinals and whatever, I don't remember the details. But yeah, so one possibility, again, I don't have any supporting facts for it, is that it could be that there was one morpheme, but that diverged phonologically after reanalysis, right? Kind of like one and the indefinite article diverge phonologically in English after. But okay, so I can say that, but how do I know? I don't.